Hi guys, Furtado and Herman here, and I want to talk a little bit about the skeletal system today. This is just a little introductory video for you. So in Schoology, I put a Google Doc. One of the things that some of you had asked for or had responded with when I asked about how the class was going was sometimes you would like something to follow along with notes. So I tried this time, and we'll see if it helps you out. So it's optional for you to fill that out. You can print it out and fill it out. You can fill it out on Google and just save it to study. You don't have to turn it in, but that's there for you as well. So first of all, when we're talking about the skeletal system, it's kind of awkward because I have to fit him in, so I'm like up and down here. But anyway, first of all, when we're talking about the skeletal system is going to include all of your bones, and it's going to include your ligaments, and it's going to include things like cartilage that make up this structure of the body, and what supports you and your body, what gives you and your body shape and structure. When we talk about bones in your skeleton, you guys are actually going to learn all 206 bones of the body. You're going to learn their names. You're going to learn special features of them, and you're also going to learn where they are. Now, of course, sometimes you have repeats of bones. So it's not like you're learning 206 individual bones, totally separate. So you'll see how that works. What's interesting is we as adults have 206 bones, but as children, you can have a much higher number, up to like 300. Sometimes they say 305-ish, and that's an approximate. And that's because as you get older, your bones actually fuse together and they take several bones and become one bone. So we're talking about our 206 bones of our skeletal system. We're also going to take some time to talk about how they grow and how these remodel when you break them. And we're going to take a look at also the microscopic aspects of bone down inside if we were to cut some of these in half and look at how they're made in that sense. When we talk about the skeletal system, we focus on 5 major functions of the skeletal system. All right. First function is support. And I think that's the one that we all think about when we look at the bones and look at how everything's set up. Actually, your lower limbs, your pelvic girdle, which is right here, your vertebral column, which we're kind of familiar with that. Those are the most responsible for actually bearing the weight of your body, for holding your body upright. And they're also, almost all of your bones are some sort of point or support or attachment for muscles. So that's another aspect of support. The second function of the skeletal system is actually storage of minerals. And that one's something that we don't always think about. In fact, there's 2 that we don't often think about. And your bones are about 2/3 calcium phosphate. And we'll talk again about the hormones that are involved in calcium deposition and resorption from bones and blood. And we'll talk about that homeostasis again. So calcium and phosphate are stored in your bones. And also in your yellow bone marrow, there are lipids that are stored. And so we'll take a look at that when we look at the microscopic structures of our bones. But so you have calcium, phosphate, and lipids. The third function of the skeletal system is hematopoiesis. Hematopoiesis, sometimes hemopoiesis. That heme or hemato usually is referencing blood. When we do the circulatory system, we'll talk about the fact that we often think of blood as just red blood cells and white blood cells. But there is a lot more going on in your blood. And there's a lot more cellular structures to your blood, or cellular components to your blood. Hematopoiesis is the production of the cellular components of your blood: red blood cells, white blood cells, plasma, etc. And there are 3 organs that they say are part of the system that does this for us: the liver, the spleen, and then red bone marrow. Red bone marrow, which is inside the central cavities of our bones, which we'll take a look at that. That is where a lot of your hematopoiesis is going to be happening, the production of cellular products or cellular blood components. Interestingly enough, your white blood cells have a shorter lifespan than your red blood cells. Your white blood cells, they generally only are around for a few hours. perhaps a day or so, but they don't have like a super long lifespan if you want to think about that. And so this process of hematopoiesis is really important because we have to replace all the ones that we lose. Your red blood cells, they have a lifespan of about 120 days. So again, they live longer, but I'm not always sure if we think about the fact that our red blood cells die and move on and we get new ones all the time. In fact, per day, about 200 billion red blood cells need to be made to allow your body to sustain life. So this process, hematopoiesis, liver, spleen, red bone marrow in the skeletal system is key and is really important and is very necessary. And it's kind of cool too, to think that this process is happening inside of our bones and it's producing billions of cells every day and we're losing billions of cells every day. So hematopoiesis, the third function of the skeletal system. Fourth function of the skeletal system is protection. And we talked about that a little bit in the very beginning of the year. We talked about the cavities, and we talked about how the cavities have bone structures that protect them because of what's inside of them. So things like the brain is protected by the skull, and the spinal cord is protected by the vertebral column, and the heart and lungs are protected by the thoracic cage. So protection is the fourth function of the skeletal system. And then the fifth and final function of the skeletal system is something we talk about a little bit more when we do articulations and movement, but it is leverage. So the fifth function is leverage and movement, and that has to do with forces of motion, which we'll talk about again in articulations and the muscular system. All right, so next, I want to talk about the 5 basic classifications for bones according to shape, because that's really important for you to know. And I do have some individual bones here on my desk that I have kind of taken off or used from other skeletons so I can show you some stuff. So I'm going to be getting them organized as we go. All right, so when we talk about bone classification, we have long bones, flat bones, irregular bones, short bones, and sesamoid bones. That last one's fun, sesamoid bones. So we're going to start by talking about long bones. Long bones are tubular in shape. They have a central shaft. They have articular cartilage on either end. And their main function is they are generally levers for movement. So some of the major bones that would be considered long bones are your arm bones. So you have 3 arm bones here, 1, 2, 3. And your finger bones, they would be considered long bones. Your, he's very flexible here, my friend Herman. Your leg bones, and your toe bones, those would all be considered long bones. Oops, twisted his knee a little bit, yikes. Sorry, Herman. Next we have short bones. Short bones are also tubular, but they are, they're almost as wide as they are long, if that makes sense. So these are clearly longer than they are wide. When we talk about short bones, these are generally as wide as they are long. And these bones include your carpals and your tarsals, so your wrist and your ankle. So here are his wrist bones. These little guys right here. Okay. And his tarsals, these are a little bit harder to see until I do some close-up videos. That's these ones here, okay? Those are short bones, and their main function, or their main, what they provide mostly is stability. That's one of the biggest things for them. And then they also do provide some movement. So long bones, short bones, flat bones. Flat bones are, generally speaking, flat. So some of these do have very logical names. They're flat. They're usually thin and broad. That's what we say for flat. So there are bones that are flat bones, like the bones of your skull, your frontal bone here, the green ones, that's considered a flat bone. Temporal bone, flat bone, occipital bone, flat bone. Your ribs are considered flat bones, so that's here, okay? Your sternum is considered a flat bone. Your coxal bones are considered flat bones, okay? And your scapula, the blade portion of your scapula, is considered a flat bone as well. Flat bones, their most important thing generally is that they are points of attachment. So they're points of attachment for muscles, and some of them protect organs as well. Irregular bones are irregular in size and in shape, and they are usually very compact. And the most common of the irregular bones are your vertebrae. So these are two different vertebrae in two different locations. This is a cervical vertebrae up near your neck. This is a lumbar vertebrae down near your lower back. These would be irregular bones. Also, you would have irregular bones in your facial bones. So that would be all of these small bones that you see with all these different little colors everywhere. Those would be irregular bones. And then the last of the classifications of bones is the sesamoid bone, S-E-S-A-M-O-I-D, sesamoid. And actually the name sesamoid comes from, you should guess. It sounds like sesamoid, and it sounds like a word that's in a television show that I used to watch as a little kid. And it's a small thing that people eat. Sometimes it's kind of like a nut, but it's not a nut. Did you figure it out? Did I give you enough time? It comes from the word sesame, as in sesame seed or Sesame Street. Okay. And these bones, they actually form within tendons, and they there's generally a lot of pressure that is generated in a joint where these bones form, and so that bone is to help the tendons overcome the amount of compression and the amount of force in a joint. Now, what's weird is different people, according to their body, will have different sesamoid bones. We don't have a lot of them, but everybody has one sesamoid bone that's the exact same, and that is the patella. Can you see his? Come here, Herman, get closer. His patella, it's sitting right there on top of his femur a little bit, okay? That is a sesamoid bone. All right, so we got the 5 functions. We got the 5 classifications. Last thing to talk about is where we're gonna go next. So when we talk about the actual skeleton, the bones, not the like stuff inside, we break the skeleton down into 2 subdivisions. We break it down into axial and appendicular. Axial, when we talk about the axial skeleton, those are the bones that make up the central axis of your body. So that's going to include your head, your thoracic cage, and your vertebrae. Okay, the axial skeleton provides support to head, neck, chest, and back, and that's generally where all those bones work. You are going to learn 80 bones for the axial skeleton, and that's what we're going to focus on this week. You're going to learn 8 that make up the cranium. You're going to learn 14 that make up your face. You're going to focus on 6 auditory ossicles. So those are tiny bones in your ear. Auditory ossicle, O-S-S. Anytime you see that, really, it's going to refer to bones. So they're auditory ossicles, bones for hearing. Your hyoid, we'll talk about that when we talk about identification of dead bodies and identifying how the body has died. And then 25 thoracic cage bones and 26 vertebrae bones. That's the axial skeleton. And then the second subdivision is the appendicular skeleton. And appendicular should sound like appendage, okay? So the appendicular skeleton includes your upper limbs, your lower limbs, and then the bones that allow those appendages or those upper and lower limbs to attach to the axial skeleton. So in this case, it's going to include 126 bones, but remember, you have lots of hand bones in both hands, and you have lots of foot bones, and they're the same in both feet, so they're doubled, okay? So the pectoral girdle, which is what makes up your shoulder region, okay? That's going to have 4 bones. Your upper limbs, if we put them together, yay, if your upper limbs, we put them together, that's 60 bones. Your pelvic girdle, which is your hip region, that's 2 bones. And then your lower limbs, he's very flexible, yoga. He likes yoga. Herman does yoga a lot. Your lower limbs,